We're going to start off with boundaries and work, chapter 11, and hopefully we'll cover 2 chapters this evening. I think we'll be able to. My voice is a little rugged, but I'm feeling like about 80%, so that's much better than I've felt the last few days. I look 100? Well, thanks for the lie. Okay, yeah, I can take that. I'm feeling that. Your intentions were honorable. I felt that. So, there, you can see, right? Boundaries and work. Work can be very fulfilling. Should I just say it like that? It can be. But it can also be a real drag. It can suck the life out of you. A lot of that depends on your job, the match, how well you're suited for the type of work you're doing. A lot of it can be associated with the culture of the organization. If it's a bad culture and, it's toxic, doesn't matter if you enjoy the work or not, the culture, the environment will bring you down. There's some things we can control in that environment, in a bad culture, but then other things are beyond our control, and that's where boundaries comes in. But honestly, sometimes you're just not doing the type of work that you're called by God in life to do. And I do believe there is such a thing as a vocational calling. I don't believe everyone fulfills their vocational calling. I think a lot of people just are very short-sighted in how they approach work. They don't really think of it as their life's work. They think of it as making ends meet. And for sure, at the least, there are seasons in our life when making ends meet is the most important objective, because we might be in a transitional phase. We might be in between. We might have 2 mortgages at the time, trying to sell one and having to purchase a new one. We could have medical expenses. There's just a whole array of things that can bring us into that whatever it takes mode. And it's commendable when you step up and you work hard and you overcome in those seasons of life. But I think as God's people, we shouldn't be short-sighted in thinking that the only thing that's a vocational calling is ministry. That is so short-sighted. It is so unbiblical to think like that. And I'm concerned that that's often the case in the church world, that people think that only ministry is a vocational calling. That's when you make a difference, and that's when there's a special call of God on your life. I do believe God gives us gifts and talents that apply and fit in the secular workforce for us to be able to make a difference in the world and to be light in darkness, to be the salt and the light that God's called us to be. And so all of this is, what I'm saying is setting the stage for a talk about boundaries in the workplace. Because remember, boundaries protect you. They relate to you, not to other people. And so you have to know where you begin and where you end in order for them to protect you. Right? So where do you begin and where do you end as it relates to vocation? And that might take some soul searching. That may take some trial and error. How many of you went through a lot of different jobs early in life? Trial and error, like, I think I'd really like that. And then it's like, no, I don't like that at all. You do it for a little while, it's like, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. All I can say for sure is it's terrible to have a job you hate. Yeah. Isn't it? Think about how much time you spend at work. You're spending, in most cases, at a minimum 8 hours a day, and in some cases, 3, 4 more hours than that. And then it's affecting your mood outside of those work hours. So it's literally crept into almost every part of your life. And if you hate it, then that's such a big part of your life and impact on your happiness. And in those cases, you gotta figure out what you're going to do to bring change. Whose responsibility is it to bring about change? Okay, is it someone else's responsibility? I've got to own it. If I'm not happy with what I'm doing, I should apply myself to get ahead in whatever ways necessary. Could be some more schooling. People go back to school at all ages. Okay? There's a gentleman that worked for the mine here locally, and he wanted to be a veterinarian, but he's like 50 years old and had never even completed his undergrad degree. And so he starts applying himself and working at the veterinary clinic, my wife's, part-time, and learning more about the vocation. And so at the age of 50, he went to Colorado State University, finished his undergrad because they have a veterinary school there. And he's now like a couple years away, maybe less than that now, from graduating and becoming a veterinarian in his mid-50s. So that's somebody who realized, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing what I'm doing. I'm not gonna look at my life and say it's too late. He did something about it. I mean, that is so commendable. I just have so much respect. I read a story as well about somebody in their 80s that went back to school to become an accountant. And I just think that's incredible. You know, they went through school at the age of 80 to become, now for starters, I don't know what anybody want to become an accountant at any age. But this is from a person who doesn't like numbers all that much. I like the kind of numbers I can do in my head, and then outside of that, I don't really want to do anything with numbers. And I certainly don't want to do anything with numbers all day, but he had a liking with numbers, and he wanted to have that as his vocation. So at the age of 80, having retired from his life's work, he picked it up. That's a success story. Anytime you're able to accomplish a life's dream at any age is a great accomplishment. Some of you may be called into vocational ministry work. In other words, ministry activity will take up, regardless of, the salary compensation component, could be voluntary, could be, a compensated role, but it takes up a large part of your daily life. You may have that type of calling, and you still got to prepare yourself for it. Just because God called you to it, right? That's part of the boundary. Boundary living is stepping up to be what God's called you to be. And boundaries are so important when it comes to a calling. There's a Greek word that's used in the New Testament. It's metron. And you can find it about 5 times in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul uses it specifically as it relates to his ministry. If I were to summarize it in a word, I would use the word lane. What's your lane? You've heard that phrase, stay in your lane. Sometimes that's used with a negative connotation, but the Bible brings that truth out in a positive connotation. God wants us to operate in our lane that he's called us to our vocational calling, whether that be ministry or whether that be something in the secular workforce, whatever it might be. develop that calling in your life, because Paul said you can enlarge your metron. You can expand upon what you're doing now. You don't have to stay in that role. You can apply yourself. When I went to work for the credit card company a number of years back, trying to think of the year, I think it was 99. But I went to work for the credit card company. I started off on the phones answering calls. And I realized, it didn't take me very long to realize, I did not want to spend much time in my future answering phone calls. I don't really like talking on the phone. And here I was talking on the phone for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And I didn't mind the problem-solving aspect, because everybody who called the credit card, you've never called your credit card company to thank them they didn't bill you a fee, have you? Did you? Did you ever call your credit card company to thank them for not raising your interest rate? Absolutely not. Did you ever call your credit card company to thank them that your card worked at Walmart? Like, I'm standing right here at the checkout, and I just want to let you know that my card worked with no problem, and I just want to thank you. No one ever yet did, right? They'll call you right there from the checkout line, though, when it doesn't work, or when they open the bill and see a over limit or a late charge fee or an interest rate increase. And so I like the diffusing and the problem solving, but I realized I didn't want to do that. So first thing I did, that little credit card agreement they send you when you get your card? Yeah. It's got the tiniest print, like 0.1 font, and it's on a little, like a fold-up tract. It's about like this size, but if you open it up, it goes all the way out like an accordion with like 49 pages, front and back. I made copies of it, large print, put it in a binder, and I studied it and virtually memorized every word of it. And I began to study everything there was to know about credit cards. And I applied myself for a role in the management training program. And so I had to go through a lot of exercises and a lot of interviews. And me and another gentleman who had an MBA, so his education in business was far superior to mine. So me and this other guy were the first two to be selected for the program. And so we were head-to-head competition. And I'm not just saying this, but I smoked him every project. I enjoyed it too. Because we'd get a project like on Thursday night, and or in the afternoon, let's say, at 2 o'clock, and I'd go home and work on it literally all night long. And I'd come in the next day with a 10-page project with charts and statistics and documentation, and he'd come in with like a half a page. And I did that all the time because I knew I had to outwork him, because on paper he looked a lot better than me. And so there's no limit to what you can do. Don't compare yourself with somebody else and say, well, they're so far ahead of me and their credentials and this and the other. And eventually, I was promoted 7 or 8 times, and was vice president of operations for a number of years. And all of it was simply because I've figured out how to solve problems. That's all. That's what people want. If you can solve problems, you can work anywhere. You don't have to know the subject. You don't have to be a content expert. If you develop good problem-solving skills, you can Google or YouTube the content, the subject matter, and apply your problem-solving skills to what you learn in a couple of hours, and proverbially save the company $1 million, which I did a couple of times. So I want to say these things before we get into the lesson, because I want you, young, older, I want you to be encouraged in the ministry calling on your life, in the work calling on your life, to have an entrepreneurial spirit and mindset that you can take on anything and achieve your goals. So let's talk about some of the problems. Start with, work is not a byproduct of the fall. It's the kind of work that's a drag that I was talking about. You know, where you have to get by the sweat of your brow. That's the byproduct of the fall. But in the beginning, God created man to rule the earth. So there was responsibility inherent within creation. He was to rule the earth, he and Eve, side by side. And we know the outcome. They failed. And work took on a different tone from there on. Colossians 3:23 says, whatever we do, and this applies so strongly towards your job, whatever you do, do it unto the Lord. Amen. That's the mentality we should carry into the workplace. No matter if it's a church setting or a business setting, whatever the environment. If it's a volunteer role, sometimes folks retire and they volunteer at the hospital or they volunteer at an organization. Whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord with your whole heart. Okay? You might have the worst boss in the world, but ultimately, God's your boss. And you're not doing your job necessarily for that boss you don't like. You're doing your work unto the Lord. So work is actually spiritual activity. It may not seem spiritual, but it's because you're not focused on it the right way. You're not thinking of it in the right terms. But work is spiritual activity. Problems in the workplace. Lack of boundaries is a major problem in many situations that come up, conflicts that happen. We're going to look at some of them. What happens when you get saddled with another person's responsibilities, okay? And that's a big issue, right? You end up doing somebody else's job. Either, the boss hands it off to you or that person pushes it off to you, or however it goes down, you end up saying, wait a minute, I'm doing my work and your work too. Maybe it's just your team first mentality. You want to step up and make sure the job gets done, even if the other person drops the ball, you pick it up. And that's okay short term, but long term, it's not productive. It's not a healthy environment when you do that. Of course, we got a couple stories in here which are always very helpful because it provides some context. So I'm not going to go through too many of those this evening. But what happens is when you get saddled with another person's responsibilities, you can start to develop resentment, right? And you suppress that resentment, and it starts to affect your mental and emotional health. As opposed to confronting it, you allow the resentment to become like a poison in your soul. And as a Christian, we know that's not going to be a healthy outcome in our relationship with God. So we should act responsibly and confront the problem and make sure that the boundaries are very clear on where my responsibilities start and stop and where your responsibilities start and stop. And if there's an instance when, you're doing your job to the best of your ability and you need some help, I'm going to step over that boundary line at your request and I'm going to help you, and vice versa. But it's not going to be an exploitation situation where anyone's getting taken advantage of. So don't fall into the trap of justifying why somebody else should do your work for you, or allowing somebody else to justify why you should do their work for them, okay? So, team first, but team first doesn't mean there aren't boundaries. Over-responsible people will find themselves taking up the slack for people who are under responsible. So you gotta enforce those boundaries on yourself in those situations, right? You got to say, okay, I want to step in and I want to take it up the slack and I want to pick up the ball and run with it, but it's not what's most healthy for the overall and for the team. Working too much overtime. You know, he gives some scenarios in here where I don't know that they'd actually work all that great, you know, where you confront your boss or you take somebody with you and confront your boss. And, you know, sometimes that's going to get you a pink slip. You know, I'm just letting you know ahead of time if you plan on taking another coworker with you and marching into your boss's office tomorrow and telling him how unfair he or she is, it may not end that well for you. But it doesn't mean, the problem is if you sign up for one set of responsibilities or one hourly situation and you end up in another one, you can't just like carry that forward for 6 months or 2 years and then at that 2 years be so burnt out that then you try to deal with it. You gotta stop it in its tracks and say, wait a minute. I took this job with the clear understanding I would only be able to work these many hours. I've got situations in my personal life, responsibilities where I'm overcommitted already, and I cannot work beyond this number of hours. So you got to communicate that up front. And it's like if you want Sundays off. If you start a new job and you want Sundays off, the best time to communicate that is before you accept the job. Say, I can take this job, I won't be able to work on Sundays. So as opposed to saying, well, I want to get my foot in the door and then show them how good I can do the job, and then I'll have some, leverage, and I'll say, hey, I'd like to have Sundays off. Like, no, we really need you on Sundays. So, you have to communicate, and the best time to do it when it comes to overtime and shift and schedule situations is early in the process, so that there's no surprises later, because once you sign the dotted line, man, you are responsible for what you commit to. Misplaced priorities. Okay, I like this example here with Lori. If you listen, your manager or your boss isn't necessarily evaluating your work responsibilities when they hand you a new assignment, give you some additional work. They may not be aware of everything you're responsible for. Okay, they have, in some cases, many employees they supervise. So, in this example here, she says, if I'm going to do A today like you asked me, it's going to affect what I'm doing here with B. And so I won't be able to get to that today. Is that what you'd like? You got to communicate that, right? So what this is doing, it's putting the onus on yourself to manage your own responsibilities, which is what boundaries are all about. Managing your own responsibilities. Not counting on my boss to say, wow, they're really loaded, and I don't think I should give them another assignment, and they're already working on B, so I better not give them A. You can't count on your supervisor. You have to respectfully communicate. Effective workers do two things. They strive to do excellent work, and they spend their time on the most important things. And if you need to manage that up or communicate that up the food chain, then work on that communication. Practice at home before you go in to the job the next day, Seriously. One of my keys to success in getting promoted so many times at the credit card company was I managed my boss. Whoever my boss was, I managed him. And by the way, the best boss I ever had was a woman. Her name's Mitzi, and she was by far the best boss I ever had. And I've told her that, and I appreciate everything she did for my career because, you know what, she believed in me. She made me feel important. And when she did that, I would run through a brick wall for her. No matter what the problem was, she knew she could count on me because of the trust she placed in me. You got to learn to say no to the unimportant. And a lot of times the unimportant comes in the form of urgency. Right, somebody, you got to do something right now. Well, like, no, I don't. Your lack of preparation, you know the rest of that. It doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. So the urgent is not necessarily the important. Sometimes the urgent keeps you from the important. So a good worker will always learn to say no to the unimportant and focus on the important. There's a law I've known about for a very long time. It's repeated here in a slightly different way, but that is work expands to fill time. That's a law. I can't remember what the name of the law is, but it's a law. Trust me. I've seen it and you've seen it. Work expands to fill time. What I mean by that is if I give you this assignment and let you know you have 8 hours to complete the assignment, how long is the assignment going to take to complete? 8. It'll take 8 hours. You gave me 8 hours to complete it. If I said, here's the assignment, the same assignment, and say you've got 4 hours to complete it, it will take 4 hours, right? Now, over time, that may not happen the first time you try it because there's a learning curve. But eventually, you'll adapt to doing the job in the length of time you're given to do it. You'll pace yourself. Even if it's subconsciously, you'll pace yourself. That's why a company with 10 employees, when they lose 2, they can still get the same work done with 8 employees. It's incredible. You're down 20% of your workforce, and you're still getting 100% of the work done. And nobody's dying in the process. Nobody's killing themselves because work expands to fill time. Jethro had a great lesson for Moses. Jethro was his father-in-law. He said, if you keep doing things like you're doing to Moses, trying to deal with every problem individually, never delegating, he said, you're going to burn yourself out and you're going to die. And he said, what you got to do is appoint elders or other leaders and pray for them and let the same spirit that's on you be on them. And let them deal with the smaller issues and only send to you the ones they can't resolve, the bigger problems. And even in that setup, there was divisions, if you will, where some would deal with larger problems with larger groups of people, others with other leaders with smaller problems and smaller groups of people. So you don't want to ever, if you're supervising, you don't ever want to set somebody up to fail. You don't want to mismatch their workload with their skill set. You don't want to give them more work or different kinds of work than their skill set can accomplish. Because when you do that, you're setting them up to fail. You want to position people to succeed. And if you're involved as an employee in a job where you're not matched, I took a job when I was in Bible college. I worked in the RV industry, and I've told you this story before, but I took a job installing furniture in motor coaches. You know, the big ones like country music bands travel around the country in. I mean, this is a long time ago, and they were selling for $200,000 back then. I showed up to the job the first day, and they put me wiring dashboards. And I'm colorblind. You ever seen a dashboard on one of those motor coaches beneath the surface? Man, there are so many wires. I'm telling you. It's crazy. I said, I can't do this. They said, you'll be fine. We'll have somebody train you. The person would stop by for like 10, 15 minutes at a time, and then he'd disappear for 2 or 3 hours. 3 a day went through that assembly. Every day, 3 a day. There ain't no stopping it, man. 3 a day we're going through. So eventually, I didn't last but about a week and a half. And the stress, every day, the stress was just so great. And I just left. I punched out, got in my car, drove down the road, just felt the weight of the world lift off of me. And then the company, the factory burned to the ground a couple days later. There's no evidence that points to me directly. But I'm just saying, the whole factory burned to the ground, you know. But I was not matched. And I tried to tell them, I'm colorblind. Difficult coworkers. Nobody's ever had a difficult coworker, have they?
That was him.
You were the difficult coworker? Yeah. You don't have to necessarily get along with everybody, but you do have to manage the relationship so that you can get your job done and not be a total wreck. You know, upset, disgruntled the whole time. Remember the law of power? You only have the power to change yourself. You can never change another person. No matter how much you try, no matter what tactic you employ, you cannot change another person. So you got to see yourself and not the other person as the problem. Now that's a big pill for some people to swallow. Like, wait a minute, you're not listening to me. They are the problem. You know, people do not intuitively want to focus on themselves. But in this situation, when you've got a difficult coworker, you have got to look to yourself and see whatever your contribution is as the only problem you can fix. I said that's the only problem you can actually fix. Otherwise, you're giving that person power over your well-being. Right? So you got to change how you deal with them. Now, from a biblical standpoint, we know that we should be treating people with kindness. And we should be treating people with honor, even though they may treat us the opposite. Right? I mean, I don't know if you've read the Sermon on the Mount, but that's what I get from it. Critical attitudes. Sometimes workplaces just are eaten up, infested with a critical spirit. Make sure you're not part of the problem. That's the biggest boundary you can set. And sometimes that means removing yourself out of the break room, removing yourself out of the conversation.
I wish I could remove myself from the nurse's station when all that comes up.
Well, you can remove yourself emotionally, and you can remove yourself from participation. Okay? You got to do whatever you got to do, whatever is permitted within, the employee rules. You can put some earbuds in if you're allowed, you're permitted to do so. You can learn to mentally tune things out. God will help you if you apply yourself. You've got to have the want to, though. But if you're the subject of the criticism, then you gotta work on not internalizing that, because sometimes a boss is just critical to everybody. And if you allow it to steal your confidence, then you're at a disadvantage and you're not going to perform well. So you've got to find a way to not internalize that criticism, as difficult as that is. I know it's not easy. But you're never going to just gain everybody's approval. If you spend your whole time trying to gain approval, you're going to get unfocused on what your job is actually supposed to be. And it's never going to work anyway. Conflicts with authority. I've got a family member who never could hold a job because within a week he always had a problem with the boss. Anybody have a family member or a friend like that? Like, oh, they finally got a job. Woo! Good times. Hey, aren't you working there anymore? Nah, the boss. Blah, 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 blah. Same story over, 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 and over, and over. One common denominator, right? All these different bosses, but one common denominator. Never could figure it out. Expecting too much, you know, God is your fulfillment. Don't try to find your identity in your work, even if that work is ministry work. Okay? Even if you're doing directly ministry work for God, don't put your identity there. Your identity is in Christ. So if you take everything away from you, everything that you do, if it gets taken away from you, do you lose who you are? Or are you still the same person? You know, is your identity wrapped up in your title, in your job, in your responsibilities, in your work? It shouldn't be. Don't allow it. You got to set a boundary and not take work-related stuff that's stressful home. And I know that's easier said than done because that's kind of like turning your mind off. But you can learn to do that. And if you don't learn to do that, it'll eat you up. So, focus, be very disciplined in this area, and leave the work stuff at work. There's not a thing you can do about it at home. You pick it back up when you show up the next day or after the weekend. Sometimes the absolute best thing is to take that break mentally and come back at it again with a fresh perspective. Because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. You get so deep into the details that you can't see what's really going on, and then you take that break and get refreshed. Problem 9, disliking your job. I hate my job. Have you ever said that? I mean, come on. If you've never said that, you probably haven't had very many jobs. Or even had a job, maybe, like Ramey said. I hate my job. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why a person would say that. I talked about some of them up front, you know, but it could be just a mismatch. Could be a bad culture, bad environment. Could be unfriendly coworkers. Could be any type of conflict that's going on. Could be the pay scale is too low, you know, and you're under the stress of trying to get your needs met. So I'm going to read this line at the bottom that I've got highlighted. They have not, let's start with the whole paragraph. However, many people are never able to find a true work identity. They stumble from job to job, never really finding anything that is them. More often than not, this is a boundary problem. They have not been able to own their own gifts, talents, wants, desires, and dreams. And then this last part is so important. I changed the color to make it stand out. Because they're unable to set boundaries. Listen to this, it's so important. They're unable to set boundaries on others' definitions and expectations on them. So in other words, you try to live up to other people's desires for your life and other people's expectations for your life. And all that is mixed up in your pursuit for a vocation. You know, what other people want. It's the worst thing you can do to raise a child and put expectations on them for the type of job or work they're going to do in life. Because maybe it's what you always wanted to do, or maybe you want them to follow in your footsteps, or you know, you want them to be a lawyer so that they'll be successful and whatever the case might be. You, as an individual, have to discover your own vocational calling. It cannot come from other people's expectations, what other people think you're good at. Listen, it's wonderful when you get advice. Hey, you're really good at this. You should think about getting into a career where you can use that. And that's great. You know, I would give presentations in my job at the credit card company, and they'd say, you know, you should be a public speaker. You really should think about that. And of course, I'd already been a pastor for about 12 years. I'm like, really? I'll think about that. So it's okay when somebody gives you advice or they give you a compliment, and that's okay. But don't let other people's expectations carve out your path in this life. Find that vocational calling from God. And it doesn't matter if, everything is contextual. It's based on where you are right now. You could be at the latter part of your life, in a retirement stage of your life. God's not done with you. Okay? You got to have a purpose for when you get up each day. And you got to have a reason to start and to go about your day. And that's a calling from God. He gave you gifts to use for His kingdom and for His glory. And sometimes that's in a secular environment where you're able to make the most difference. Finding your life's work. A lot of what I said in the beginning comes from the last part of this chapter, but I really felt like I should start with it to kind of set the stage for why we need to focus on these other problems that come up along the way. I felt like this was actually the most important part of the chapter, that it framed up everything else and gave us the motivation to resolve these other issues and problems. What fits your strengths and your passions? Whatever it is, it's going to include some risk. Well, I've always wanted to start my own business, but, right? But what? You should be scared. But being scared also shouldn't stop you. And you know what? There's a high percentage you'll fail the first time. But further, there's a high percentage that you'll succeed if you try again. The problem is most people who fail the first time never try again. Or maybe you wanted to go back to school and you've been procrastinating. You're like, I don't know if I can do the work. I don't know if I'm smart enough. I don't know if whatever the other reasons might be. Some of you should like take Bible college classes. Some of you should take, some career type path classes. Others of you, it could just be some recreational kind of stuff at the community college here in town. Find something you enjoy and learn and grow and develop that. There's so much fulfillment when you do that. Psalm 37 says, commit your work to the Lord, your way to the Lord, and trust Him. He'll open the doors, but you've got to be the one to go through them. As you develop your talent skills, look at your work as a partnership between you and God. I just told somebody tonight this very thing, unrelated to the lesson. I said, you know what? You work for I put his name in there, and I said, you work for Incorporated. It says, no matter who signs your paychecks, and ultimately you're doing your work for the Lord. You're doing it for His glory. But it's you Incorporated, man. You're responsible for the work you do. And whether it's appreciated by others, whether it's recognized by others, I'm doing it with excellence unto the Lord. And if nobody sees that, I know that God sees what I'm doing. Okay? So, I'm gonna cover this next lesson, but the first thing I want to do is see if there's any questions, because we're not going to take a whole lot of time to go through this next lesson. I'm going to hit on some key points with the digital world, but he takes a lot of time to explain the history of how the computer came about and all that, and we don't need to cover all that. We are where we are, and I think most of us here, some aren't, but most of us are old enough to remember when we didn't have a cell phone, right? Okay? So we know how it all developed. But are there questions about boundaries and work?
Well, like I say, I thank God for this skills that He's given me to be a unit secretary, because in my life as a kid, I didn't have much skills or stuff like that, but I didn't ever think He gave me that skill to do what I'm doing, especially answering phones.
Yep.
And I thank God for that. And look at where he's got me, 22 years. This month of the 11th will be my
That's well done.
22 years.
Amen. That's so commendable. Well done. Anyone else?
A lot of things you talked about, like leaving your work and stuff like that. I learned these boundaries. I actually have good boundaries in order. Come to find out, but that's where it stopped, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, you can have situational success in life where you're very successful in how you navigate your work life, but your personal life can be a total wreck, and vice versa. Your personal life can be wonderful, but the way you manage your work life can be chaos. So the key is learning to apply these boundaries, and that's why we're talking about every part of life here in these lessons.
My boundaries stopped when I clocked out and hung up my hard hat.
Yeah.
That's when I really should have started.
Well, it's like walking for the Lord. I know a lot of people who have been on probation, and their walk with the Lord is at its very best when they're on probation. They need that framework. They need those guidelines to adhere to. It's that extra stimulation that's necessary, and you give them too much freedom, and they're going outside the lane, man. It's not true of everybody, but believe me, in my role, I've just seen too many situations get unhealthy really fast. Okay, well let's skip on then, and we'll take a quick dive into boundaries in the digital age. Like I said, this first part of the chapter is giving us a history lesson on how the computer came about and everything that came after the computer. Who got in early on the digital age, by the way? Who was an early adopter? When technology became available, you jumped on it. So like you were one of the first people to get a cell phone, you were one of the first people to get a computer, you were one of the first people to get a pager, whatnot. Russ, you raised your hand. Who else? How many late adopters? Like, I don't want one of those newfangled cellular phones.
Electronic leash.
Huh?
Electronic leash.
I was an early adopter. I used to have, like, hooked onto my belt, I had a pocket PC, a pager, a cell phone. I had the whole thing, man. You know what a pocket PC is? You got the stylus there and it's a little handheld device. You can do spreadsheets on it. Like, I really needed to go around doing spreadsheets, right? In my hand. But I looked cool. I looked cool. But whether you were an early adopter or you came along kicking and screaming, here you are. And there's no going back, right? So what you've learned since then is it can run over top of your life if you let it. Right? You can let it control your life if you don't guard your heart, if you don't prioritize your time, if you don't set boundaries for yourself, for your own personal use. Now, not even bringing into it the need to do so with your children. But if you're not doing it in your own life, you never heard that word hypocrite? If you're not managing your own time, screen time, let's call it screen time. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, and it's been a little while, but I can give you the general information. The average number of hours that a child, from the age of 9 to 16, the average number of hours per day spent in front of a screen that's not school related is 9 hours a day. 9 hours a day, non-school related, from the age of 9 to 16 is in front of a screen. A phone, a computer, a TV, a tablet, video game, screen time. You can add that up. times at 365, and it's just really, really bad. And one of the things the lesson brings out is they've scientifically proven the effect that has on the human personality, especially in the area of empathy. People who have this massive amount of time spent in front of a screen instead of with people have virtually no empathy at all for others. Because you learn empathy by being with people. You empathize with people's struggle, with their pain, with their hurt, with their perspective by being with them, not by reading words on a screen. I'm going to jump forward on a lot of this. I want you to read it, and I hope you did. But I do want to hit on a few of the very, very good points that are being made. He brings these principles into action in his personal life. Phones are routinely turned off and away during important relationship times. There's nothing worse. I mean, if you're with a close friend or somebody you let your guard down with and you're just hanging out, it's okay to pick up your phone and look at a text message, to casually look at your phone, you know, because the familiarity is such that it's appropriate. But by the same token, don't abuse that, like with family. And I will never answer my phone if I'm in a meeting unless I have a belief that it's a 911 type of a phone call. I'll never say, hold on. Because what I've got going on in person, if I'm out to eat or in a meeting with someone, what I've got going on as person takes priority over everything else. But I can't tell you the number of people that do not have those same values. And I can think of one situation where I went out to breakfast with someone, and to start with, they were 10 minutes late. And then secondly, when they got to the restaurant, they stopped at 3 to 4 tables and visited with people as they were working their way back to me. So here we are now, about 20 minutes. And then less than 5 minutes after being seated finally at the table, then the phone calls started. Conversations, not, hey, can I call you right back? Conversations. So here we are, like 30 minutes in now, and all I've done is basically said good morning. I'm like, why am I here? You see, you do not let this little device control your life. Amen? So, you have, if you don't set the boundaries for yourself, that's what will happen though. Email, social media. I got to tell you, I could live without social media for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I could. The reason I use social media is A, for the church, because I know we can reach people through social media. And B, I try to stay, it's one of the ways I can stay involved and know what's going on in the church members' lives. I can let them know that I'm interested in what's happening in their life. Their kids graduating high school, they're at a soccer game. I can tell them it's a great picture of them. I can say they've got a beautiful family. I can say congratulations. I can say happy birthday. But if it wasn't for those like life value reasons, I have no interest in scrolling through up and down social media, you know. That's just me. So I'm just letting you know, I don't have a problem with that. Now, if I've got a number showing here at the bottom on my text messages, it'll eat me alive until I tap on it and clear that number. I do not like to see a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 5 Now, if I have a meeting with somebody for an hour, frequently there will be 5 to 8 or so in that. But I immediately have to clear that. I cannot let my phone sit there. Now, I don't give it a lot of time and attention. My main objective is just clear the number. Just clear the number. And if you don't have a lot of time to respond, the worst thing is when you get a text message this long, without paragraphs, of course, this long. And what are you going to do? You got to set aside an hour to read it, and you got to set aside another hour to respond, because what you can't do is just respond, great, okay, or the thumbs up. There's some people that hate the thumbs up. Don't ever send those two people thumbs up. So somebody sends you a text that long, and then you can't do it. So you say to yourself, I'll have to read that later and spend some time giving a thoughtful response. And the problem is you can forget about it because you don't have time. The perils, I'm telling you. But on the other hand, my email, I get so many emails. It doesn't bother me at all how many unread emails I have. In fact, at this very moment, in my inbox, unread, I have 245,186 unread emails. And you can read that if you'd like, if you don't believe me. Almost 250,000 unread emails. But I scan my email regularly throughout the day to see if I have an email from someone I know, something that's church related, something that's ministry related, something that's of importance. So what I'm saying is you develop these systems. When I was working for the credit card company, the IT department would call me regularly and tell me I had the largest mail file in the company, that I absolutely had to do something about it. There was like 5,000 employees, and I've got the biggest mail file, you know. But I was involved with so many things. I got literally 300-400 emails a day, work-related ones. So if the subject line didn't tell me what I needed to know, or if it wasn't like 10 people, which I designated, and they would, the line showing in my inbox would be red, the color red. Unless it was those 10 people, I didn't read your email unless it pertained to something I needed, or the subject line was something that grabbed my attention. I didn't have time. I could have spent all day reading 300 emails. What did you do all day? I read emails. And in my company, if you needed something done, you didn't send an email. You picked up the phone and you called them, or you went to their office and you dealt with it. And anytime I had a conversation with my boss and I got asked, what did you do about it? If I ever said I sent an email, I'd get reamed, man, right on the spot. I learned that very fast. And so you pick up the phone, you hold people accountable. People never feel accountable to an email. They easily dismiss it, push it aside. They'll know you'll send them another one tomorrow. You pick up the phone, you go visit, you put a face right in front of them and say, what's going on? I need an update. You hold people accountable. So don't hide. What I'm saying is don't hide behind technology. Don't hide behind text messages. Don't hide behind emails. Don't expect your world just to automatically get better because you sent an email to somebody. Deal with people relationally. Talk to people. You can express urgency in a way that's not harsh in person, but it's hard in writing. It comes across harsh, or it comes across non-urgent if you try to be nice. But in person, you can actually convey multiple emotions. You can communicate with kindness but urgency at the same time. In person, they see your expression, they hear your tone. So there's things that technology is never going to be able to do if you really want to be effective in your priorities. Teens, hey, you already know, right? Don't you? Teens got a problem. But it's the same problem we would have had if technology had been there when we were kids. So let's not pretend that we're better than them. We'd be there and maybe worse. Maybe worse. Boundaries, 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 boundaries. Set guidelines, have conversations, know your kids' passwords, check the websites they visit, look for trouble on their social media accounts. If you need to, use a site blocking tool because, you know, you'd love to trust little Johnny, but you know what? When you were Johnny's age, you couldn't be trusted, so don't think differently about your own kid. Restrict the area where they can use online screens. Play some of the same games so you have an understanding of the game that they're playing. You don't have any idea what it is. Set guidelines for what's an acceptable amount of time. Have them talk with you. Encourage them to talk to you about problems that come up in an online environment. And enforce any limits that you set. Teach them that privacy is a privilege that you earn. It's not something that you just get guaranteed, right? Fear of missing out is a big deal when it comes to social. Well, I've got to check my phone constantly. I got to check you know what? Some of you might have like notifications for social media, but I personally can't do that because it's good enough for me when I go to the social media to click on the little notification button and to see whoever. If I had it pop up on my screen every time somebody liked something on Facebook, it came that way by default, and I immediately changed it because it drove me crazy. Every time my phone beeped, I thought it was something important. And somebody liked my post. What do I care? You know, I can find that out like this afternoon when I have 15 minutes to look through it. I don't need to send false things like that are not important, but kind of are getting me to think they're important, because then it gets confusing. What's important and what's not important, you know? And then I'm like looking like, well, how come they just gave me a thumbs up and didn't put a heart, didn't love that? And I'm spending 10 minutes stressing about the fact right in the middle of my day about why, you know, the other person's post, they put a heart on theirs and they just gave me a thumbs up. You see how that can throw your day off? It's not really that important, is it? It's not really that important. Fear of missing out. That's a lie from the devil. Just multitasking, in fact, is a huge, huge misnomer. The idea that you do I'm not talking about like chewing gum and walking at the same time, okay? I'm talking about real like multitasking where you're doing actual work projects, like multiple ones at the same time. The idea is that you get more accomplished, but the truth is you get less accomplished. Scientifically proven, you get less accomplished by being unfocused. So don't allow the digital world to run over top of your life and you're always picking up the phone, always answering an email, always responding to a text, always tapping away at the keyboard, and at the same time you're trying to do something else. Your whole day is going to be shot in 100 different directions. Set boundaries. Sometimes it's not time boundaries, sometimes it's importance ranking, you know. So responding to my text messages right now is not a priority. It's not the most important thing I should be doing with my time right now. You know, sometimes it's subject related. Social media, you know, I don't need to prioritize social media up early in my rankings as far as what I need to get done, right? But again, in my role, I try to spend a little bit of time on the social media so I can be involved and know what's going on. It's a way to know what's happening in people's lives. But some people say, well, you know what? I don't like that social media because everything's so negative and everything's political and everybody's talking about one another. And, you know, they've got some fancy buttons that are real easy to use. You can unfollow people. You don't even have to unfriend them. You can just unfollow them, and that means their stuff doesn't show up in your news feed anymore. So as soon as somebody goes on to that negative thing or their soapbox thing or whatever it is I don't want to see, that I don't want as content in my life, unfollow. If I want to know what's going on in their life, I will just type their name in and go visit their page. I don't need the stuff coming involuntarily. So I got to tell you, I have no negative, virtually no negative stuff in my social media. Virtually none. And it didn't take a lot of work either. It didn't take a lot of work. That's a boundary. If you let that stuff just keep coming into your day, aggravating you and provoking you to anger, and you're not going to change them. You got to change yourself. That's the boundary. I set that boundary by not permitting that stuff into my news feed. Well, what if they're saying something bad about me? Well, what if they are? Let me tell you, when somebody blocks you, they block you so they can talk bad about you, say bad things about you. So just get over it. Just get over it, okay? It just shows the type of person they are. Don't get me started on that. So, this last part's really important. Engage with people. Focus on creating a life of freedom. Observe regular non-digital time periods where you don't have the need to check the phone or be on the computer. You know, when Debbie and I were first married, she didn't realize what I was doing, and it created some uncertainty or some maybe even suspicion in her mind. But when she would walk in the room, I would be on my phone when I was in the room by myself. When she'd walk in the room, I'd put my phone down. She's like, well, how come is it every time I come in the room, you put your phone down? What are you looking at? It's like, I don't want to be on my phone when I'm with you. I don't want to be distracted. I don't want to be on my phone. When I'm by myself, it's fine. But when I'm with you, I don't want to be on my phone, so I put my phone down. Oh. So sometimes you got to let people know why. It never crossed my mind that she would, think that I was looking at something I didn't want her to see or know about. It's like I put the phone down. Every time I come in the room, you put the phone down. Of course I do, because I don't want to be on the phone when I'm with you. I love this, and I'm only going to take about 2 minutes, and then we're going to finish. We'll be done. Train the people in your life not to expect an instant response. Let's all read this together, okay? Number 5, I don't hear you. Train the people in your life not to expect an instant response. Takes a little time. Now with Jason, he trains you not to get a response at all. But the key is go back when you have some time later in the day, go back and look back over your text messages again. Because if you're counting on it still showing as unread, as a prompt to respond, you may have tapped on it, read it, not responded. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't time sensitive. It wasn't that important. So I try to go back over and, scroll down to see, is there anything I didn't respond to that I need to? But it's not that I won't respond immediately. Lots of times I do. But I don't want to set up this expectation all the time that every time you send me a message, I'm going to immediately respond to you. So what happens is when I'm unable to, it's like, well, how come you didn't respond to my message? And what's wrong? And are you mad at me? And all these other crazy ideas. Because I put that expectation there that I'll have to respond just like that. And it used to be you could call, like in the professional world, if you needed a realtor, you want to look at a house, you call somebody and say, hey, there's this house I want to look at that you've got listed, or it's, in your area, and I'd like, to see it. And then you leave that message, and then you really think, they'll call you back within 24 hours. But in today's world, if they don't call you back in 5 minutes, they don't care anything about my business, I'm going to try this other realtor. It's the world we live in. Yeah. And in the service industries, if you don't respond, you lose the business. When you order something, I remember when I ordered things online in the past, it was 4 to 6 weeks as the gold standard for delivery. Now it's like the next day, I'm like, where's my package? 4 to 6 weeks must be coming from China twice. Expectations. So don't get people's expectations too high, that you're always available, always 24/7, no matter the time, no matter the scenario, always available. You know, we should be available for urgent, really important, urgent things. But a lot of the stuff that goes on that disrupts our life continuously is non-urgent, non-important, that can be prioritized to a different time. Am I right? Protect relationships, and we'll just end with that statement. Questions quickly about the digital aspect? We all understand it, right? We've learned it the hard way. Doesn't mean we're following what we know. Doesn't mean we're adhering to what we know would be best. But we know, don't we? We know. All right. So we did get 2 chapters in. Oh, it is. That's my, I didn't turn that off. It just went away. That was Christmas, I think 2 years ago, or something like that. Out in the desert. Yeah. That's when I was taller than Zach.
Now he's taller than you now.
Yeah, he's got me about a half an inch. Ramey, would you close us in prayer?
Sure. Father God, I'd like to thank you for this gathering, to listen to this word, to help us in our life, these boundaries that we need to set for us, for ourselves, guard our hearts, listen to wise counsel.